Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny panel meeting. Before I actually start the meeting officially, I'd just like to actually welcome all our new members to the panel, and also thank the panel members and those that have gone on to better things for their help and support last year. If we could just have a round of introductions from the panel members, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Eric Firth, Dewsbury East.
Councillor Darren O'Donovan, Dewsbury West.
Kim Taylor, Voluntary Co-op Tea.
Alison Munro, Almonbury Ward.
Moving on to the agenda, do we have any apologies?
We've received apologies from Councillor Habiban Zaman and Councillor Bill Armour.
And moving on to the minutes of the last meeting, is there any matters arising from those minutes? And therefore, can I actually move them as a true record of the proceedings?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? I'll just put in my normal one of holding a bank contract with CHFT. And all items will be heard in public. Are there any deputations or petitions?
None received, Chair.
And no public questions?
None received, Chair.
Okay, then we'll move on to item number 7, which is the Health Systems Financial Overview for 25-26. If the speakers could just introduce themselves, please, before they start.
Chair, if you just want me to just do a bit of an introduction.
Yep, that'll be
Okay. Welcome everybody. So Michelle Cross, I'm the Exec Director for Adults on Health. This afternoon we've invited colleagues from our health system to go through health system financial overview. We're going to go through winter pressures information for you, and then we're going to finish off on the adult social care risk. We've got colleagues from health who will introduce themselves, and we're expecting a head of service to join us at some point, but I'll let colleagues introduce themselves as we go through the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Gary Boothby. I'm Director of Finance at CHFT, but I'm also the finance lead for NHS Partners across Kirklees in the finance, and it's in that context that I've prepared a few slides that hopefully you've received that give you some context as to the financial position for 25-26. So what the first slide, and so hopefully you'll see the slides coming through, the plans for this year overall, the NHS partners within the system have got a combined planned deficit of £7.5 million for this year. I think it's important to call out that as a West Yorkshire system, which we're all part of, we have got a balanced plan for the West Yorkshire ICB and the West Yorkshire system, which I think is important. So this is on the first slide, please, if someone is able to flick that one over. So when the slide comes through, what it does is it shows you that breakdown of where that deficit is by partner, NHS partner within the system. But I think it's important to note that a number of the partners are obviously operating across other places within the West Yorkshire system. So obviously Calderdale and Huddersfield within the Calderdale borough, Mid Yorks within the Wakefield borough, and obviously South West Yorkshire across the three different districts. So when you actually combine and break that share down, what it shows is that the plan for the NHS partners, their share of it within Kirklees is actually a £380,000 deficit plan for this year, which I think is favourable to where we've been in the past. I think what we've got to be careful though, and what's important to note is that in order to deliver that plan, that does require £105 million worth of efficiencies, which is obviously a significant scale. It's running at about 6.5% kind of scale of efficiency that's required by partners. So it's really critical that people are aware of that, and it is a financially challenging year. So whilst the in-year position looks reasonable at a £380,000 deficit plan, it is heavily reliant on people delivering those efficiencies. Still seem to be having a few challenges with the slides, but the next slide effectively then goes on to say that whilst we recognise that's the position of the NHS partners, there are obviously other key partners in the system that don't necessarily fall within the NHS budget. So the local authority themselves, Locala, the Kirkwood Hospice, as we're all working together on this. We've all got a key role to play in the health of our local population. And whilst they've set balanced plans, they have got some significant challenges too. So some of you will be familiar with the challenges within the local authority, obviously, but again, that requires further efficiencies and further savings to be had. So overall, when you build in the overall saving that's required for all partners across Kirklees, you're looking at the share being around £75 million. So it's a significant saving challenge. Having said that, at month 3, and some organisations are now starting to report month 4, we are still on track to deliver that plan and meet that particular objective. One of the things that I did want to call out though is the way that NHS funding has changed a little bit this year compared to previous years. As a system, West Yorkshire is in receipt of what's referred to as deficit support funding of around £50 million. The payment of that is provisional on us all delivering our plans. So one of the challenges that we have got, and one of the risks that we've got that all organisations are flagging, is that if elsewhere across the West Yorkshire system one of the NHS partners starts to struggle or fail again to deliver that plan, then the West Yorkshire system would lose that best part of £50 million, and a significant chunk of that is coming into both Calderdale, Huddersfield and Mid Yorks. So there's almost a system risk. The design of doing it in such a way is obviously so that we're working together as partners across West Yorkshire to try and do the right thing as partners. The other thing to call out is that whilst we've got plans, and I talked about £380,000 deficit plan for this financial year, the underlying problem or the overall scale of that challenge is much higher. So we're receiving various non-recurrent funding, we've identified non-recurrent measures to resolve some of those challenges, and we continue to work with partners in terms of how we get back into recurrent balance, say on a recurrent basis. There is a slide that within the pack that then talks about efficiency. So I think one of the questions that's being asked is where those efficiencies may come from and what does that look like. So generally speaking, most of the partners have got significant governance and robust processes around identifying their own efficiencies. So again, some of you will be familiar with that from the local authority's point of view. And most of those are subject, well, all of those are subject to a quality impact panel and equality assessment. So that's really important to make sure that where we are making some tough decisions, that we consider the impact on the residents and the patients that we serve. I think things are improving in terms of the partnership working, so we now understand the impact of some of those decisions across partners. So we've agreed various principles around no cost shunting between organisations. So one organisation, for example, may choose to stop doing something, but it's not a genuine saving if it's just going to create a problem somewhere else in the system. So we've got a spirit and now a track record of working together to deliver this collectively and no cost shunting. As the finance community, we check each other's CIP, cost improvement programs, efficiency programs, whatever, waste reduction, we'll all call them something slightly different. But essentially we review each other's, one, to try and get some learning from each other. If one organisation is doing something that another organisation isn't, that's an opportunity for us. But also really to then test the impact and whether it will have an impact on a different part of the system. So that's where the efficiencies are coming from. I say, in summary, I would suggest that, generally speaking, the position that we've landed on is as good as it's been for Kirklees for some time. It is a non-recurrent position, but there are some real significant challenges in delivering that, and some real partnership working that we can demonstrate, and we've done lots of things together about how we can use the money in the Kirklees pound differently, really, making sure that we only spend it once and as efficiently as possible. So there's some real risks because of the scale of that challenge, in particular the CIP, not least the ongoing challenges that we've always got around winter challenges that we'll talk about later on in the presentations this afternoon, challenges around length of stay, and the ongoing challenges of complexity and the needs of the patients that we serve. There are other specific organisation challenges to the ICB, particularly around prescribing. The Mental Health Trusts have got some significant challenges around out-of-area placements. So lots of things that, again, as partners, we're working to try and mitigate some of those risks. But as it stands at this moment in time, we have got a balanced plan and robust efficiency programmes in place to deliver that plan. I think that the last question that I was asked to try and resolve, or that came through in the pack, was around recruitment and retention. I'm not quite clear what the question or challenge was, but in terms of the acute organisations, I think all would present, actually, we've got a better recruitment position with our substantive colleagues than we've had for a long while. So the pipeline in terms of nursing vacancies and medical colleagues is better than at any time I can remember, really. I've been doing this a long time now, but it's a favourable position. So we have got less vacancies than ever. There's a lot of scrutiny on NHS partners in terms of how much they're spending on agency and bank, and some real specific targets to try and minimise some of that premier cost work, and actually try and identify how we can employ local people, giving local people skills and reduce vacancies and so on. And then the other challenge that I think was worth calling out, everybody will be aware of significant changes in terms of the ICB and some significant challenges. And I think it'd be remiss of me not to mention that will pose some risk for us. So you'll be aware that broadly we're talking about a 50% cut in the headcount for the ICB, and lots of work is still ongoing to try and understand what that means, what we're not going to do anymore, who's going to pick up that work, or how it can be done differently, with a workforce who are all individual colleagues in there that have obviously got concerns about their future and what may happen and so on. So again, I think that's just another concern that we would want to highlight at this point. So I won't say any more on the financial position, but happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Firth?
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain, because I don't understand, principles agreed about no cost shunting. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so I think in the past, the way that the systems have been set up as individual organisations, you're almost competitors. So if the acute trust could stop doing something, they would do, and regardless of the cost or what happens to the patient elsewhere, I think what we're trying to do now, and these principles that we've agreed, saying, well, just because the acute trust may save some money, we need to understand what happens to that patient and where else they're seen. So it's no good one party saving £1 if it's going to cost somebody else £2 to provide that care. It would be the wrong thing to do. So we've got a number of examples where an organisation or one particular partner may have chosen to do something, but actually that's the wrong thing to do in the overall context of doing the right thing by patients and the overall thing for the local pound and taxpayers' money.
Hi. I can't help but notice when you're looking at the figures, the mid-jokes deficit is significantly greater, 8.1, than CHFT at 2.9, and I just wondered if there was a reason for that.
Yeah, I think some of this can be quite misleading, to be honest. So the underlying deficits are broadly similar between the organisations. we've operated under, without getting too technical, under block contracts for the work that we do for a number of years, and there's an exercise taking place to realign those blocks for the actual work that takes place. But in the interim, the ICB were effectively generating a surplus until it's agreed how they will pay commission work. And between us, we agreed how that surplus would be distributed, and it was distributed based on a cash basis in terms of who needs the cash most. And on the back of that, CHFT were in need of the cash more so than Mid-Yorks. So in 24-25, there was a cash distribution that went to Mid-Yorks so that they could continue, with an underlying deficit, could continue to pay their suppliers. So they had a better cash position at year end than CHFT did. So the way that it appears, CHFT have done quite well out of that non-recurrent cash distribution effectively. So it's a bit misleading, if I'm honest.
Thank you. Thank you. So I found the agenda item 7, the slides, very difficult to understand. There are lots of abbreviations which I didn't know what they meant. It was very jargonistic. You talk about stretch. You talk about, my colleagues already also raised a question as well. In connection with the jargon that's being used. So that's my first question, really. I mean, could it, in future, could this be, there was no detail, there was nothing that we could really follow or understand. It was very jargonistic, lots of abbreviations, which I didn't know what they were, and statements with no explanation as to what that might be. I mean, you say the ICB, there's been a significant change, and it's not clear what is to be done. What's caused that? I was also going to ask the question about the principles about no cost shunting, the risk to delivery of the 20 to 25, 26 financial plans. I was going to ask you to talk us through that. What is there a predicament facing, for example, Kirkwood Hospice? So if you could just talk me through some of those things that I've just raised, please. Thank you.
Yes, so happy to do so. I think I'll take your comments on board. I think the brief was to provide an overview. So if there's something more specific that you want the detail on, then we can provide that. But the brief was, can we just provide a financial overview, which hopefully is what I've tried to do. I said, well, when we talk about specific slides, and so that risk to delivery, I think I've just described some of those specific risks to organisations that all partners are working through, trying to mitigate against some of those risks. So I accept in terms of some of the terminology, and I'll take that on board, but in terms of there are still some gaps and challenges in terms of what that CIP, being cost improvement programme, waste reduction is what it's called at Mid-Yorks, QUIP, which is quality innovation, which is what it's called in the ICB. So we're all calling that efficiency challenge something slightly different. But so in reality, there is still some risk around making sure that we go ahead and deliver against some of those opportunities. Take that one on board.
What about, can you just explain what you talk about the ICB, there's been a significant change.
Which slide are you referring to, sorry?
So this is in agenda item 7, towards the end of that.
Yeah, so again, that's again what I hopefully described to you in terms of the 50% reduction in terms of the cost out. So most of you will be aware of changes within the NHS with a view that, so a specific target was issued to ICBs to reduce running costs by 50%.
Right.
And that's where we're still seeking clarity and doing a lot of work, trying to understand, well, what services are still needed to be delivered, who's going to be delivering them, and so on. And that was, I think, why I flagged it as a risk on one of the other slides and described it as a further risk.
Okay. And then you talk about a stretch. I can't find it now. Sorry, I made lots of notes and then I can't find them when I'm... I can't find it.
So in terms of within the original pack, there were a further couple of slides that were added that not within this pack now, that effectively were used as examples of how we're working together. So in terms of getting to a balanced position, the whole of the West Yorkshire ICB was set a further challenge of identifying another £33 million. Now, because we'd all got significant efficiency programmes, a different approach was identified that said, well, we can't just keep salami slicing or trying to identify, further or greater efficiency. How are we going to go about doing that? So a significant piece of work, which was led by Vicky, took place that started to review some of the services we're delivering and try and identify duplication and where it could be done differently across partners. So I think the slide was really just used to demonstrate how we've come together and worked together as a system, which I think is a positive compared to where we may have been previously.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I found the slide now. Sorry, I couldn't find it. I was just desperately looking for it. So thank you very much. Thank you for that. Yeah.
With regards to meeting your targets, we'd like reassurance that service users are being used, that they're being engaged in the decisions and that patient impact is being monitored.
So I think, as I alluded before, we have a quality impact assessment and an EQAA for any schemes that I'm not going to say every scheme is done like that. So if we used to buy something for £1 and we can buy it for 50p, we don't consult with our users for those type of schemes. But obviously anything that we believe has an impact on service users, there is consideration, and then they're taken also back into service user groups where appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Donovan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about some of those efficiencies as well. The first slide just outlines that 7.5 million deficit, and I wondered because I wasn't on this panel last year, what was the deficit the year before? And I assume with efficiency savings you met whatever deficit that was. The deficit of 7.5 million for 25-26 that figure is after the efficiencies of 105.2 million. So if you're going to make 105.2 million, yet you have a 7.5 million deficit, I'm sure there's rationale for this because I'm not financially minded, you bear in mind, is that why would you not put 7.5 million on top of the efficiencies if that's in a deficit to make more savings? Because otherwise I think I'd like to know, how do you, on a balance sheet, how do you rectify that deficit at the end of financial year? And my third bit was, me and Eric have sat here for a lot of years when we were trying to save Dewsbury Hospital, and I don't remember a year when there haven't been huge efficiency savings that are needing to be made. And I just wondered if you do remember a time over the last 10 or 15 years where there were no efficiency savings being asked of you. I see some shaking heads. I expected that, but I'll let you explain a little bit more. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, so some good questions in there. So I think the first bit would be saying, well, if you're going to save 105, why not make it 112 and then balance? The 7.5 is part of the system, so the West Yorkshire system is balanced at that. So there are various funding changes that are taking place across the system, but for partners across the Kirklees place, that's a 7.5 million deficit. There's a 7.5 million surplus being made elsewhere. And when we're trying to decide how we carve them up, there's lots of factors that we take into account in terms of what do we think is realistic in terms of the scale of challenge. Because we could all say, well, we'll deliver 10%, 20%, but if you ain't going to deliver it, then you're just kidding yourselves, aren't you? So there's lots of challenge put on ourselves in terms of getting to that target, and lots of benchmarking used really to try and understand where the opportunity may be. This year, for the first time, the national team sent out a number of metrics per organisation that said, it was looking at things like length of stay and various other metrics that said, well, if you could get to the average length of stay, this should save you X, or so on. So things like that were used to try and help organisations signpost them towards what their opportunities may be. I think one of the challenges that we've always had is making the savings recurrently. So, speaking on behalf of CHFT, last year of our savings program, so we had a 32 million savings program last year, but we only delivered half of it recurrently. So effectively you're storing up a 16 million problem for the following year, aren't you? So a lot of our focus and attention this year is saying, well, we've got to do it on a recurrent basis, not just as a one-off. And that requires system change, transformational change. You can't do that by, holding a few vacancies for a while, or that type of thing. You need to actually say, well, what does the workforce look like? What does a revised workforce model look like, and so on. Off the top of my head, and I'll do some digging around while others are talking, I can tell you what the deficit was for last year. Partners across West Yorkshire, we did deliver the plan. I think, from memory, I think Mid Yorks were slightly behind against the plan that they'd set, and CHFT ended up significantly better than the plan due to some additional monies that came down from the centre. So I think we were about 5 million better than the plan by year end. So it is an ongoing challenge, and the way that the funding works, there's a challenge built in. So the way that the funding works, effectively you get an uplift that's in relation, that in theory covers pay award, inflationary pressures, all those other things. But then there is another figure that comes off it and say, well, you might need 5%, but we're only going to give you 2% because we expect you to be 3% more efficient, or whatever the calculation works out for that year. What we're all keen to do, so all partners are working on their medium and long-term financial plans. Certainly for CHFT, we're in the process of developing our long-term financial plan that will go in with our full business case. And what that's got to demonstrate is at what point we get back into recurrent balance.
Thank you. I wanted to look at the slide that was about focus on delivery. Are any of the partners at risk of under-delivering from there? I'm assuming it's a question of, say, is 1,000 cataracts bought or commissioned or something like that. So is it likely that money would have to be returned? And if it is there also a penalty for if somebody's under-delivering, doesn't fulfil the contract, that there is additional penalties and not just the money that they've received returned?
So I think I'm not quite sure I understood the first part of the question, but essentially this year there is a variable element to the contract. So if partners across West Yorkshire do not deliver the volume of activity plans and performance improvement that we have signed up to, there is a potential that income is lost to the West Yorkshire system. As a result of that, and hopefully because it's just the right thing to do, most colleagues are still trying to drive that activity through, because slowing down activity or whatever else it may be might give you a one-off short-term financial saving, but actually you've still got to care for these patients at some point. You're adding costs along with obviously the potential harm to those patients longer term. It's not a wise thing to do if you can. So all partners within the system are obviously trying to deliver the activity and performance improvement, i.e. reduce the waiting list for all its patients, and that's the plan that has been set across the patch. So in terms of the penalty, theoretically there is a potential loss of income if any partner reduces or doesn't deliver that volume of activity. So does that answer the question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Is going back, it is around the actual staffing thing. You sort of say that is vacancies within sort of the acute trusts are at an all-time low. I have noticed that other trusts are making staff redundant. Are any of these efficiencies that are going to be made within CHFT or Mid Yorks be due to redundancy of staff?
So So in terms of most organisations have got some kind of vacancy control process in place, which just assures that there's the adequate challenging to say, well, actually, have we thought about doing it differently? Have we adopted technology, whatever it may be? And longer term, you know, let's make no bones about it, the way to deliver some efficiency is actually adopting some of the technology and doing things differently. CHFT certainly have got no plans whatsoever to make any redundancies or requirement to make any redundancies. The plans that they have got in place can be met through natural turnover and gaps, and in reality the investment of where we need to be making those changes are often to fill shortage gaps. You know, let's focus our energy where we're struggling to recruit to, because there isn't a pipeline of colleagues in that particular specialty or whatever it may be. Mid Yorks did have a plan, because alongside the ICB challenges that we've referred to in terms of reducing the headcount, all providers were asked to reduce their corporate cost reduction between 1920 and 25-26 by 50%. Now for CHFT we actually reduced our costs between that period. Mid Yorks had got significant growth in terms of some of their corporate costs, so they've been looking at how they may do that and whether they can do that through natural turnover, but at this point there are no plans for redundancies.
Thank you. Councillor Firth.
Thank you. I hope this doesn't sound a daft question, but as AI, or can AI make a significant contribution to this cost-saving exercise you're going through?
I think it can. It isn't at the moment, but it can. So I'm no expert in this field either, but I think we've all used RPA, so robots and bots to take on various functions and transactional things. The next stage is how you get AI to do things differently. So most organisations are trialling different elements of what can and can't be done. And certainly, you know, if speaking on behalf of CHFT, where we've obviously got a bit more knowledge, we are looking at, we've got a work stream which is referred to efficient ways of working. So how can we use and adopt the technology that's out there, and learning from others about how can we do something different using AI to hopefully deliver a better service, but obviously more efficiently too. No, good question.
There's no such thing as a daft question.
I think just on that one as well, one of the key things about AI is it needs to come with a cost at the start. So there's obviously installing, buying, whatever the AI is, but there's also then the training and the cultural change that goes with that. So it might ultimately mean instead of 2 people doing minutes, you only have 1 person or whatever, because you can do it using these different tools that we've got. But people need to be trained how to use it, understand how to use it so that it is efficient. And then the other bit that goes with it is the governance around it. So understanding the data protection and everything that needs to be built in. So I think AI looks good. And there's some really good things out there. We all probably dabble at home doing it ourselves, don't we, with different things. But the reality is understanding that data and the protection bit and the governance bit that wraps around it to keep us all safe as well. So at the start, it isn't going to be a saving. It will need investment to be able to be rolled out, people to be trained, etc., to be able to use it properly and safely.
Thank you. Is there any further questions the panel wants to ask? Can I just thank you for the presentation today. We obviously note that the changes to the ICB are as yet unknown, and obviously what repercussions that will have to the health landscape within Kirklees. That will be part of our work programme there. We also note that there are robust plans in place to manage the efficiencies and the further stretch target of 7.7 million across the partnership, and at present delivery of efficiencies of 105 million target across the partnership with a provisional deficit of 7.5 million across the things there. Can we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the winter pressures?
I think we've got a presentation for this one as well, Chair. So I'm Vicky Dutchburn. I'm the Interim Accountable Officer for Kirklees ICB. I'll let colleagues introduce themselves as we start the presentation. But just to say, we've been asked to come and talk about winter. Winter happens every year. It fascinates me that we do winter presentations. And I think it's also fair to say that we are in a period where I wouldn't say winter ever stopped this time, that we've had, we call them seasonal pressures, but we have seen those pressures go on for longer periods of time, and it's about the acuity of our patients, presentations at hospitals and the impact it has on services through hospitals and back out into community services. So that's one of the real key things for us all. So we've got a presentation around the key questions that we were asked to cover. I think it's fair to say that we are working collectively as a system, so this is not about a single organisation, this is about how all the various organisations within Kirklees come together. We're all cogs in a much bigger picture. However, having said that, what we do need to acknowledge is that NHS England do expect that every winter, this time of year, we're in summer, aren't we? But at this time of year, we are developing our winter plans so that we are putting forward plans for how we will manage those seasonal surges and mitigate against the pressures that puts on our system going. So we are in the midst of that at this time. First draft of the plans went in last week, and we are refining those, and we've got a whole governance process as partners where it goes through our urgent and emergency care boards so that partners are signed up to that. So that is ongoing, and that plan includes 7 priorities that we will pick up as the key questions within the presentation. I think it's you, Kath. We're on slide 4, just for information.
Hi everyone, I'm Kath Sims, Service Director for Adult Social Care Operations at Kirklees Council. I think you've seen this slide previously really, which is just describing our approach to hospital discharge. I think it's important to say that it is an integrated approach, so it's the council working with our health colleagues, both acute colleagues and primary care, as well as with Locala and the voluntary and third sector. And we want to work with people in as streamlined way as possible to ensure that they can be discharged from hospital and hopefully return home. Home first is our key priority of our discharge pathway. You've got the different things broken down there, and I'll just quickly run through them. So I think it is important to say that I think recent figures would show 94% of people return home from hospital without any involvement from adult social care or from this customer journey. The vast majority of people will go into hospital, they'll receive some treatment, and then they'll go home, and that's absolutely fine. But when people do need some additional support, that's where this model then comes in. Pathway 1, we want people to return home, so that will be somebody returning home following a stay in hospital and either receiving a domiciliary care package of care or, probably more appropriate, some reablement support. That support will be put in to people's homes, and people will be given support to get back up on their feet. It might be, preparing meals, some physical therapy type support, and then again that reablement would be for short term, and then that would come out of the home and people would return and be independent, hopefully, in their own home. And we support approximately 50 people a week through our reablement services to get people at home from hospital. Where people do need some more support, that's where we've got 2 bedded units. So we've got our intermediate care, and we've also got our recovery beds, so it's 40 in each unit, so Moorlands and Ings, so that's 80 beds. The key here, particularly around winter planning, is that where people do need to get a little bit of support in a step-down bed, as we would call it, that then they can quickly then get as much independence as possible to then return home again. We don't want people to be there for a long-term period of time. And I think when we talk about winter pressures, that's a lot where we've put some additional resource, additional social work resource as well, so that people can move out of those bedded units again to go back home. And about 2/3 of people who go into intermediate care or our recovery beds do then go back home and live independently. The final pathway, which is pathway 3, is where people have got more complex needs and they might require that lot more long-term care. And I think this is where we do have some challenges across the system, that our providers, particularly around complex care, we're working with commissioning, we're working with our health colleagues just about ensuring that that provision is there in place. It's important to say that we never assess people for their long-term care and support in an acute setting in a hospital, because people are not at the best in a hospital, as you can imagine. So that's why we want them to either go home, and that's the best place for an assessment in their own environment, or in one of the sort of short stay bedded units that we've got, or even on pathway 3 when it's long-term care and support, we would still want to do that assessment once somebody's settled into a home, just to make sure that is the absolute right place for them. When we talk about winter planning, it is about working across the system and seeing how we can make this work as efficiently as possible. I think what we don't want to do, and I think what Vicky would agree with, and Helen as well, is to say, oh, let's do something new, let's try something totally new. This is a good model, it works really well, and we want to enhance it rather than do something different. So when there are blockages, we'll work together to make sure that we can move people and support people to get home into the right place and live independently as possible. So that's that slide. So we'll pass on to Helen now.
Hi, I'm Helen Duke. I'm Director of Operational Services for Locala. And one of our remits, you've got just a brief slide here, but in your packs you've got more detail of the services that we provide. So in April last year, we got our new specifications and contract for Kirklees Community Services, and that followed 2 years of working across the system, developing specifications for each of those services within the area, which was quite a unique and really positive experience of what do we want to deliver these services for people in Kirklees. So you can see within the list, within your packs, you've got a number of core offers within there. So we've got our community nursing, our community rehab, so there's a range of therapy support within there, as well as our specialist services. And with the new specifications, we're fully embedded and mobilised with them now. So as Vicky mentioned, our pressures are spiking throughout the year, so we are ready for winter. We want to make sure that we're delivering our specification, we're supporting patients and people to stay well at home, to avoid going into hospital. And by doing this, we can't do it alone. We do a lot of partnership working around how we get referrals in, how we signpost and transfer care to other services, and we deliver that holistic approach. For winter, there's a couple of teams there. So we've got our intermediate care service, like Kath mentioned, for the beds. So we've got nursing and therapy input to get people out and home, because we know people recover at home better than they do within a bedded setting and in hospital. And we've got into our integrated transfer of care team. So we've got a team who's dedicated to try and prevent people going into hospital, but also get people coming out of hospital more quickly. And they're fully integrated with the local authority and within the acute trusts as well. Other services we deliver as part of wider than the Kirklees Community Services contract. We deliver our reablement service commissioned by the local authority, and we're delivering some support around wound care as part of our treatment room service. We also are commissioned to deliver some integrated alliance and integrated ways of working. So we've got our virtual ward service. So we work closely with CHFT and Mid Yorks to provide care at home for people who still have an acute need. So we provide the wraparound support in Locala with a consultant oversight and work in close partnership to be able to get people at home still that needs that additional support, and then we can move and transfer care into other services more streamlined. We've also got our community urgent community response service, so we're an alliance approach there with Kirklees Council, Local Care Direct and Cure Roads with GP Federation, and that works really well because we've got a number of providers supporting a notch to our response to avoid people going into hospital. And what we can do from once we've had the assessment in the community, we can transfer and directly put people into an intermediate care bed or recovery bed, or provide that support at home, which avoids anyone going into hospital at the start. Also within your pack, I know this is an adults, but it just shows what the children's services that we do deliver. So we are really looking at how to have a smooth transfer of care between children's and adult services. So from a winter perspective, ensuring that that journey happens really seamless and they can move through. And we work really closely with the local authority from an adult social care perspective too. So as we've sort of alluded to, it's business as usual for us. We've got the good models in place that we continue to deliver. In order to, when we do come under pressure, we do have business continuity plans for all our services. So we move towards those when we see any, for example, adverse weather conditions, which we did see in January this year. So we have tried and tested them within winter. We had that horrible ice that we had through there. And then just on the AI approach, so we have been testing some AI on our route. So for example, our community nurses might visit 3 or 4 different people in the community. They can tell us which is the most efficient visit to do. And we're testing some of that technology, which is proving actually it's got better use of our colleagues' time travelling, which means we've got more time to spend with the people who we're supporting. So some of that testing, even just from a journey, really can give us more time to provide care. Thank you.
So if we go on to the next slide, we were also just asked a specific question whether there's a shortage of domiciliary care providers across Kirklees, and I think the opposite is probably the case. So there's no waiting lists currently for any domiciliary care, and what I mean by domiciliary care is care in people's own home, so home care might be more traditionally known as. And we've worked really closely, our commissioning team has, with our domiciliary care providers, and they've actually told us that the current market, it's grown significantly in Kirklees over the last 5 years, and actually there's probably too many providers at the moment who are competing over a limited number of commissioning hours, and that just makes the whole market quite difficult to support and to sustain and to grow in terms of quality and how we want people to work to have that real sustainable, stable market. Providers are covering large areas across Kirklees, so just like Helen said there, there's lots of travel between places, and it's quite fragmented how it currently works. So we've got some really good examples of providers really going that extra mile, working in those person-centred ways, being really sort of outcomes focused, as we might call it, in terms of, rather than you've got a half-hour call, it's like, what does this person want to achieve from your visit today, and supporting that in a flexible way. But we know that we do also have some issues with some providers as well, and we do work closely with them, and they're subject to enhanced monitoring by our Kirklees contracting team, and we work with the ICB on that as well where appropriate. So that's leading me in to say that we are about to recommission a new domiciliary care framework from next year. So we've got all the feedback currently from the current providers. We want to work on a more locality-based basis, so that'll cut down that travel time, means that providers will be able to work together. We want providers to work together instead of competing with each other, and have patches that they can work in. So although there isn't a shortage at the moment, like I say, probably the opposite, we do know that we can work in a better and more streamlined way, and that's a focused piece of work that will be happening, it started now, and the new framework will be implemented from June 26.
Okay, so just really to wrap up a little bit on that, I think some of the key points for me on this is we're talking about winter, we're talking about that surge period. For all of us, this is business as usual. So what we do is we're looking at making sure that our pathways, our services are the best that we can absolutely deliver for Kirklees residents any time of the year. What we then are looking at doing is building in our business continuity plans, so it's how we can then address any periods of surge and escalation within any part of the system. So this isn't just about what happens within the hospitals, because it might happen within community and vice versa. So it's as we work as a total system to be able to support each other and be able to flex those services when we need to do at the right time. So that's the crucial thing for us. It's about how we take business as usual and we can be flexible within that. The other thing that I just wanted to say is, as part of all the work that we do, people will be aware that probably in previous years, the government have issued what they call winter pots of money. So generally you get to about October time and they suddenly say, we've got this money and what you're going to do with it over the winter period, and everybody goes into a mad panic to try and find something. We've been told really clearly this year, because of the economic position across the country, there will not be any additional money for the systems. So the money that we've been allocated is the money that we've got. So that ethos and way of working is going to bear fruit for us this year, because we've not been reliant on getting extra money, which is really positive. Having said that, because some of that was made recurrent in our budget lines, what we've done over the last 2 years is we've allocated short-term funding to deal with winter pressures, is we've taken that learning forward. So we've looked at the schemes that we've put it into, and we've explored with patients and the services what has worked and what has added real additionality and benefit to our system. And in doing that, we've built that into our recurrent positions. So there are some services that we will be doing that people previously thought were done for winter. So some examples of that are we did what are called the acute respiratory hubs that were put on between October and March. Specifically, it helped deal with COVID when we had the COVID outbreak, but things like the RSV for children, etc. So what we've learnt from that is having those hubs and being able to get those individuals out of routine GP appointments into a specific hub. It helps our general practice and our GPs keep business as usual going, but it also helps the hospitals because there's a direct route for those patients, so they're not turning up and spending long periods of time in the A&E departments and equally spreading the viruses. So we've agreed that had real value, it had some real benefits to the population as well as our system. So we have built that in recurrently, and again from October, so we know there's a period of time when we get the best benefit of those. Those services will be running again, led by primary care, so we've got those hubs identified. Equally, within the GP core contract, they don't work bank holidays, so you get to Christmas and you've got a 4-day bank holiday, which runs very quickly then into the Easter, depending where Easter falls. So again, what we've done is we've put some money aside, and we're working, and we've got plans set up with GPs that they will run clinics over those bank holiday and Sunday periods, so that we've got that continuity of service for patients again. So there's things like that we've taken the learning from and we've built in. Other areas that we've done, and people will have seen previously, to support the home first model, we did a lot of work around discharge to assess and trusted assessors, and we did that with our third sector organisations. We trialled that with non-recurrent funding. Again, the benefits were proven to us, helped the entire system. So what we've done then through planning this year is made sure that we could find recurrent funding to put that onto a contract. So not only have we done it recurrently, we've been able to put it on a 3-year contract like a lot of our other services, which has also given that sustainability and assurance to the third sector who provide that element that service is going to be there, so they could recruit appropriately to do that. The other things that we've done where we've seen the benefit, and these are becoming part of our business as usual now, is the integrated hubs. So we've got staff now from all our providers attend meetings, virtual meetings, they're not always in person, but with the acute hospitals, looking at those patients that are potentially getting ready for discharge, and between them agree who is the most appropriate service to pick up that individual rather than patients being passed. So we've supported that work and supported some of our other organisations, for example like the hospices, to be able to be a part of that by being able to bolster up some of their workforce. So I think that the key thing in this is that for us this is business as usual. It is making sure our business continuity plans are as strong and as robust as they can be, that they can accommodate surge and escalation within our system, whether that is at winter, at Easter, cold snaps, or even hot weather, to be perfectly honest. But those plans also flex if we have incidents. So if we had a motorway pile-up or whatever, we would use the same plans to be able to flex, and we would be able to then call upon all our partners to work out what was the crucial things to be able to deliver.
Thank you. Councillor Addy, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say how delighted I am at the domiciliary care changes and the locality working. I've seen it working in other areas whatever we do will be our own, but where it's worked, it's had fantastic improvements for the travel times, retention of people, different ages people being local to where they're working. So it works for the staff as much as it works for the cared for folk, and that's great because the more we look after those staff, the better care our most vulnerable are going to get. And I'm just really chuffed to hear that it's all coming on strong. Well done.
Thank you. I have to actually agree with that. When you've actually got sort of carers coming and they are going from sort of say to Kirkburton to the centre of Huddersfield, out to Golcar or various times, there's too much travelling time involved in there. Whereas if they are patch-based, if say there are, say, Golcar, Cowersley, that sort of area, they can get to them more quickly. They're more likely to have the same carers there. Councillor Firth?
Hey.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. You did mention COVID. Is it still very much with us? Are you expecting this winter to be grim again? Because
I'm not going to say grim. The pressures there. COVID is very much part of our daily lives. And at different times we do see, I'm going to say, outbreaks. So I think it's fair to say that Mid Yorkshire Hospital at the current time has got an outbreak, and we are managing it at that point, which is based on national criteria about how many patients are affected at that point. But it's part of our business as usual now, that we've accepted that COVID is in the system and we get on with it.
I accept that things do change continually, and it seems to me that your team is embracing that change and you're doing a fantastic job, and thank you.
Councillor Munro?
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question about the UEC plan, which focuses on the 7 priorities. Is that a plan that's aspirational, or is it a plan that's achievable? Because I'm just, about the lengthy handover delays should be eradicated, delays should be no more than 45 minutes, minimum of 78% of patients to be transferred or discharged within 4 hours, bed blocking, how are you going to deal with that for the 30,000 patients staying 21 days over their discharge date, reducing the number of patients who remain in ED for longer than 24 hours regarding their mental health admission. I mean, bed blocking and mental health admission presumably are not within your control, I would have thought. But if you could just explain that, please.
Can I just interrupt? Is one of the questions I wanted to ask, this 30,000, is that incorrect? You've got 30, it is in the documents it says 30,000 is we're still in hospital 20 days after being deemed fit for discharge, and I assumed at first that I'd read it wrong.
It's not wrong. So there's I'm laughing. There's a number of things in this. So if I answer your question first about is it achievable, NHS England have set the priorities and they've set the metrics for people to work to. And what we have within Kirklees, but within our system, so I'm going to say the CKW system because it's both our acute trusts are part of this. We have accepted the metrics and we've accepted the challenge. So let's just be really frank about that. And we are already working towards that aspiration and where we can get to. And we've got differing pictures. So on the CHFT footprint, we have already made massive improvements into the 4-hour waits and the number of patients waiting excessive lengths of time, and that's changing the pathways. So we've introduced assessment units, SDECs, so people come in, they get assessed very quickly and get moved to an appropriate place. So discharge isn't always discharge from hospital, it's discharge from the A&E departments to the most appropriate place. So that's the first thing. The challenges regarding ambulance handover rates, etc., we see that on the news all the time. And again, across both our acute trusts, we're doing masses of work to address that. And that includes, obviously, our YAS colleagues to be able to do it. And again, not only is it about opening the assessment centres so that we can get people to the right place quickly as possible, and the assessment centres also take people direct from community. So if a GP rings ahead, somebody might not even end up in the A&E departments. They might end up in the right assessment unit, seeing the right clinicians at that time to be able to get their support. So the handover time with ambulance crews is massively, again, improving. CHFT are in a stronger position than Mid-Yorks, but we have seen marked improvement during quarter one with our Mid-Yorks colleagues about the staff that do the handovers, the detail that comes in with the patients, so we get them in the right place. The 30,000 is a correct figure, but it's about the metrics and how they've counted it. So they've taken specific metrics about the 4-hour waits, etc., to be able to do it. So it is about the journey and the move through from the patients. So we'll still have the same number of patients attending A&E departments. It's about when the clocks start and stop and where those patients get to. So if they've had a detailed assessment with the UCR team in the community and then they've come in straight into an SDEC, they'll bypass that process because we've got them to the right place in the first instance. So the figure is correct, but it's about the benchmark and the baseline the government took at that time to count and what they counted. It was done on not last year, the year before I was out-term position. So it's always, I'm going to say the baseline is always taken on a figure that you've probably already made lots of improvements on. And because they've changed the metrics that we are counting, and it can be subtle changes. So like we're saying, it's the 78% of people not waiting 44 hours and things. Those subtle differences make differences on the numbers. If we counted the same thing every year, we'd all feel more comfortable, to be honest.
So can you just clarify, because it does say 30,000 people waiting more than 21 days from being deemed fit for discharge, and that's why I assumed that it was actually wrong.
No, and it's about when somebody is fit to be discharged, medically fit to discharge. So people go into hospital for a whole range of conditions, and they've based it on an average figure. So you get somebody and they might become fit for discharge but then suddenly acquire an infection, or like I've just said, we've got the outbreak of COVID in Mid-Yorks. Well, if those patients develop COVID, they're no longer fit for discharge, so your clock stops. So that period, and that's what it is. So it's based on an average. So you're talking about somebody who might go in for a respiratory infection to somebody who's gone in with very complex fractures and everything else.
Sorry, can I come in there? I think regardless of the metric, I think most of the providers recognise that we've got patients that in hospital beds that ideally don't need to be there. That's the bottom line, and it regardless of what we're counting or how we're counting it and so on. And there's a lot of work taking place with system partners then to try and understand what we can do about that. And there's things that the providers themselves can do. So within the hospital, making sure that everybody understands what the expected date of discharge is. So it sounds fairly obvious, but it's not always in place kind of thing. So if everybody's working to a particular day, so if a patient comes in with a particular condition, the clinician should have an idea that says, well, on average, it takes X to resolve this particular, so we should be working to a week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be kind of thing. So there's things like that that the providers are working on, and then obviously working closely with other partners to make sure that once we know what that date is, well, is all the support set up around it, rather than just telling partners the day before and say, well, we assumed you'd know that the patient needs this, that and the other. So there's lots of work being done together in those teams that I think are being described this afternoon. So I don't want the target and whatever it is, but there is a real difference we can make to our patients by working collectively, and we're making some significant progress, to be fair.
You asked a specific question about mental health as well? Yeah. I'm not going to say it's not within our control. It's within the system and the partners' control. So the Mental Health Trust and the Acute Trust work really closely together about the patients who attend A&E departments. But equally, we're doing the work with South West Yorkshire Mental Health Trust about their own patients and potential delayed transfers of care. And again, some of that is recognising the complexity of those patients, but the plethora of partners that need to be involved. So at the point somebody has admitted, if we already identify that there's housing issues, etc., that we get housing involved early doors, so that when we have that anticipated planned date of discharge, people are already engaged. We're not trying to engage them at that point when it might take 6 months to find suitable housing and things. So it's more about the programmes of care that we've got in place to be able to do it. I'm not going to say it's perfect, because it isn't. And I'm not going to say we don't have long delays within the hospitals of people with mental health problems because we've got a blockage somewhere else. But what we do have within Kirklees is we know the problems, we know where they are, and we are actually actively working together to try and resolve those at this time.
Councillor Addy?
I think, Vicky, like the rest of the panel, maybe we're still a little bit confused about this figure that's been put in here, because it does say 30,000 people are waiting more than 21 days from preparation, you know, from being ready for discharge. And I appreciate sometimes they're ready for discharge, then they're not, you know, that discharge date moves, that ready. I think we just need better figures, don't we? Because obviously that's quite a horrific figure to look at.
It's not our unique figure.
No.
That is the national figure.
No, it's the national figure, not our figure.
So it's not our figure, so it's
right.
It's recognised.
Have we got our figures?
Well, we will have, because we have top.
But that clarification to say that includes A&E and stuff like that, that's really sort of muddying that water of we've got people ready and there isn't, because you can't work to make facilities better to discharge to if you've no idea what that figure is. I think it's just very confusing, even as a national figure, to be honest. But is that national figure, as in that's what it amounts to in Kirklees on a national basis?
No, any day. It's 30,000 any day.
You see, I think that's
delayed
all been a bit, you know, like, so local figures would be really useful for that, wouldn't they?
And we do have local, because what we obviously do is for all our pathways, and I'm looking at Kath and everybody on this, for all our pathways, we would be able to tell you on any day how many people are waiting, what their anticipated date of discharge is, and well, we can say actual dates of discharge. So we have that. One of the slides that I put up about the learning, it had a line on it about the left shift. We call it the left shift work. So what we've recognised, and it lends itself to what Gary was saying, is that it's about the pathways and where we know we can make a difference. So there are areas of work that we are working on with the Trust about actually we've got cohorts of people and it's not ideal. So what can we do to support those? So you've got the national figures, you've got the national metrics. We then are doing what we need to do for our residents. So it's not always directly relatable back to that figure, but it will contribute to that figure.
I think we were all thinking it must be an annual figure or something, because it seems such a monstrous amount.
Helen.
Kim. Kim. So this is a question for Helen, I think, from Nicola. I'm just interested in how everything's affecting the community services at the moment. I mean, I know community services are under pressure anyway, but with the left shift and more emphasis on community, for those patients that require, say, district nurse input, or those patients that have had a stroke or need specialist rehab, how does that work in terms of meeting the required amount of visits? How's your recruitment and retention? I'm presuming you're not going to get any extra money over winter. So if the staff go down, I know you've got business continuity plans, but is it likely, or has it happened that some visits are limited, or you know, what's the general feel with community services at the moment in terms of meeting the discharge pressures?
Yeah, I think because we've been doing all the work over the last couple of years to get from being more integrated and identifying people when they need to come out, we can plan and prepare in advance. I think we're in a unique situation in Kirklees because we've done the piece of work around where all the specifications as part of that work that we did over that time was what is the demand and capacity. So we did all that modelling based upon the previous years of demand coming through. So the models as they are are in line with what the demand is. Right. So from a community nursing, a couple of years ago, we had some significant challenges around recruitment. We were at one point 40% 2.5 years ago when everyone was struggling with recruitment. We're now down to 3% vacancies. So we've just had, because it's quite a big service, there's about 250 colleagues just within community nursing. So we've had 10 vacancies across the patch and we've had 20 people apply for those vacancies. That's the first I've been around 6 years. It is absolutely amazing. So we are because we've remodeled and done some very different ways of working, we're working differently, we're looking at, we've had apprenticeships over the last couple of years to support people through. So this year, I'm going to touch wood, we're in a very strong position. I think we've got really good mitigation in place for when we do have sickness. Our demand and capacity model does include a percentage of sickness and vacancies and leave, so we've put all that into place. I think we're doing a big piece of work on stroke at the moment, so we're working in close partnership with the acute trust, so we are supporting patients on the ward, identify who needs to come out. We've got early supportive discharge, so we can get people out more quickly, and we've just done a big piece of work around gap analysis. Sorry, I'm trying to move to see you. Gap analysis within sort of stroke patients. There's some new national guidance as well. Yeah. So when we did that modelling last year, there was some additional resource that went into our stroke service in order to accommodate and meet the national requirements. And we was able to do that within resource because we've done a big piece of productivity work on how we can work smarter, how we can work in partnership. For example, we've got one referral route in, so we've not got 3 different triage going on. So we've been able to be more productive and increase our capacity by doing that work. So we're really comfortable of where we are, and because we did have a bit of a bad winter, we've tried and tested some of that and we've learned from it as well. But I think the most success is we haven't done it independently. It is done as a collaborative approach, which helps us through these times.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's reassuring. Thank you. I've got another question, if I may, Chair. Just a quick question on the UEC plan, question 1.1. Patients who prioritise as Cat 2, brackets, heart attack, stroke, sepsis, response within 40 minutes. If a heart attack is category 2, what's category 1, or am I just misunderstanding it? It just, to me as a layperson, it just seems 40 minutes for a heart attack case potentially is a long time.
Yeah, and believe you me, that's not what West Yorkshire Ambulance deliver for us across West Yorkshire. We have much better response times than that. Again, the categories are based on national criteria. So they've set the criteria and they've based the response times based on averages. So you're comparing, I suppose, an inner city with a massively rural area where it might take longer. So they base their average times. In Kirklees, in West Yorkshire, they are much quicker. So we usually have responses well within 18 minutes. And I think the Cat 2s were well within 23 minutes.
So is a heart attack Cat 2 then?
Yes, but it's somebody who is still alert. There's So this is where the criteria comes in, because people, and I'm not making any judgments, but people usually assume somebody's having a heart attack, they've lost consciousness and they've had a cardiac arrest. Right. That's Cat 1. People can have a heart attack and be sat talking to you, albeit that they are sweaty, clammy, not well, but are still alert.
So that's the difference. Okay, thanks. I was just concerned that maybe that referred to Kirklees. I think sometimes it's what's national and what's local. Thank you.
Across West Yorkshire, but certainly across the CKW, so Calderdale, Kirklees, Wakefield, with Mid-Yorks, our response times, our ambulance response times have improved again last quarter, so we are well achieving.
Trend. Thank you.
Can I just come in on top of that? It's just within Kirklees we work through our urgent community response, and we actually work in partnership with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service and pull Cat 3s and 4s off the list. So we are doing that piece of work alongside, which will help support, you can get them more quickly, Cat 1s and 2s. So we've got that really good position in Kirklees with the UCR.
Chair, sorry, could I just ask, it's just for clarification this, in relation to the winter plans, the UEC plan focuses on the 7 priorities. What does UEC actually stand for? All right, okay, and that's so. All this is all national. It's all national, right? Okay, I think it would have been great. Yeah, good to understand that from the start. Okay, thank you. I should have asked that question. I'm so sorry. Thanks.
Thank you. Is the virtual ward has been established now for at least a couple of years, from what I can gather, within CHFT. What plans are there to actually stop admissions by having patients admitted to a virtual ward? And what additional support would actually be given to those patients?
I'll come in on that. So yeah, at the minute with our virtual ward, we have a respiratory cohort and a frailty cohort, and we are just looking at having, from a local perspective, we provide the wraparound support. We're looking at widening that, where we will be the so to speak, the days on visits, eyes on approach. So we'll be able to extend the number of patients coming through this model. We're also looking at enhancing from our urgent community response. So we will have a direct transfer to the consultants to say, we're with this patient, this is the assessment that we've done. We can speak to the consultant, they can say, right, these individuals can go on to the virtual ward, and we'll have that daily MDT and consultant oversight. So it even prevents going into hospital. It could be you may have gone in for 2 to 3 days, but actually we can avoid that by doing it from a step up, as we call it, so to speak. We've also obviously got the recovery beds and other ways if somebody needs to be in more of a secure bedded setting, but then we will have a direct transfer of care into the services we've talked about, for example, intermediate care, and do as a transfer of care instead of a new referral for discharge, so it helps with the flow come through.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Thank you very much, actually, because I really felt your responses were really, really, really good, and it's a really robust plan you've got in place. So, thank you.
There was just one further thought that I had actually have. Obviously, discharge is the patient's journey is made up of so many different components. If one part of that component fails, then obviously all backs up. And it was around, obviously, the domiciliary care providers. What was in place if, say, a care provider couldn't provide the care due to for financial reasons, pulled out of the contract sort of suddenly? What would be in place for those people that have already got care in place?
I'll take that. Do you mean provider failure? Yes. In terms of provider failure, we would look to procure from other providers locally, if possible. I suppose worst case scenario, our reablement services will pick those individuals up. It doesn't happen as often, because what we don't want to create is a service of last resort, because obviously reablement is a finite resource that we've got across Kirklees, but we have the responsibility as a local authority to make sure that there is continuity of care. So we would pick that up ultimately, but we do work with providers across the sector, and like I think Kath said earlier, we do have surplus providers, so it's rare that we would have to pick that up as a local authority.
Thank you. Are there any further questions the panel wants to raise there? So I'd like to thank you for the presentation. As I've said previously, is discharge planning, winter pressure planning is very much a joined up collaborative working between all providers. It's also noted that there won't be any additional funding from central government for this winter, that the ambulance target times for Cat 1 patients were national targets, and within West Yorkshire they are significantly better than the national targets, and there is a lot of innovative working practices that are in place to prevent A&E attendance, unnecessary admissions and GP appointments. Thank you. If we can then move on to agenda item number 8, which is looking at the risk management.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alexia Gray. I'm Head of Quality Standards and Safeguarding Partnerships, and I've been asked to come here today to talk about the adult social care's approach to risk management and hopefully provide assurance around our processes that we've got in place to manage that effectively, to identify risk, to manage risk, mitigate risk, and what our escalation process is. So I'll cover off our risk governance structure and oversight, what we consider as risk identification, and also the matrix that we use, which is set by our corporate risk colleagues. And then finally, just talk about the one risk that we've got on the the corporate risk register as it stands. So if we move on to the next slide, there are dates in here. This is just indicative to kind of give you a timeline, but and it's a continuous cycle, so it never stops. But I suppose if we were to think about the start of it, the first thing would be that we have a monthly head of service meeting where we look at the risks that we've already identified, but more importantly, talk about risks that may have been coming through from service managers. So an example might be if we're seeing in a particular team that there's a high vacancy level, for example, or it might be that we know that we're going to be starting some work, bringing in some new technology that might impact on something. So it's just picking up those emerging issues and having a discussion around those. That then gets taken to our social care leadership team, so SCLT, which is in the presence of our service directors, so we get a higher level view of that and assess whether we think that those risks need to be on there or whether we can retain those within service. We then submit those to a risk management group, which meets quarterly, and we determine which ones need to be escalated to the corporate risk register, which would be things that would be of quite high significance that we need to sort of explain council-wide. And then finally, that risk register is shared with the executive leadership team, so with our chief executive and directors. So in terms of how we think about risk, we think about it as events that could happen that prevent us from achieving our objectives. And the risk management process is how we identify and record those events and put plans in place to respond to those risks. So our processes are structured to identify possible risks, and then we've got a score in consultation with the risk matrix based on how likely it is to happen, so the probability of something happening, and then how severe something would be if it did happen. And then obviously around that we build those appropriate mitigations or controls, and that could be to reduce either the probability or the impact, or it could be both. And then with consultation with corporate colleagues, we look at whether those controls are working effectively or determine whether any future actions are needed. So the next slide, which is a bit of a busy one, but it's our corporate, it's the one after that with the matrix on it. Thank you. So in terms of, this is something that's used across council, so this is an adult social care model, but obviously we work to this. And the table on the left-hand side sets out the different categories of risk. So they fall into, it could be financial, it could be legal, or an implication around statutory compliance. It could be a reputational thing, so that could be something around the outcome of an inspection, for example. And then we've got community and service provision, or things that would fall into that may cause adverse publicity. And then the scale up the side from 1 to 4, 1 being the most minimal impact and 4 being the highest. So that they're the kind of categories, and then the actual matrix itself looks at the frequency and the likelihood. So again, if something's rare, not likely to happen, it's going to fall into the 1 or 2. If it's going to something that could be very significant and the likelihood of that be very significant, you'd be looking at the 4 and 5s. So your overall score, if it was something that was really, really worrying, would be your 25. So that's how it's sort of worked out, and that's why it's graded into those green and amber and red boxes. So within adult social care, we currently only have one risk that's on the corporate risk register, and that relates to adult safeguarding, which I don't think is surprising because obviously it's an area of risk in itself. Kath is the risk owner of that, so service director is the owner of the risk. But using the risk matrix, that's currently scored at an 8, so it's not hugely high. So the way that we've kind of assessed that collectively is that the likelihood of something happening is low, but if something did happen, the impact could be high, and that's why it brings it up to the 8. But just to give you a sense of some of the controls that we've got in operation around that, so we've got our corporate safeguarding policy, really good review of mandatory training requirements, additional training. We're in the process of reviewing our person in the position of trust policy, so that's where allegations have been made about a staff member potentially alleged to have caused harm. We've got our self-neglect policy and pathway in place, which has been there for a significant amount of time now, and we know that that works really well, along with all the multidisciplinary work that wraps around that. And I think it's important to mention around the safeguarding that we work so closely across the 3 boards. So in terms of some of those cross-cutting safeguarding agendas, such as prevent domestic abuse, modern slavery, we can't do that in isolation because it affects everybody. It's children, adults. It's a broader agenda. Obviously, we've got governance through the board and also through attendance at Scrutiny. We take a lot of learning from our safeguarding adult reviews. So, you know, if there's been an incident that's happened, or if it's a lessons learned that we need to look at, then we will make sure that's disseminated across teams and broader than that across the partnership. And I think more recently the waiting well policy has been introduced, and that's been rolled out across all of the 4 community hubs, which means that everything is risk managed in a much more effective and timely manner. It was being done before, but this has just put that process in place, and it now means that we've got timescales for when we expect things to be done by, and when we would say, for example, Section 42 inquiries that allocated within 48 hours, which again I'm not saying that wasn't happening before, but it just means that we can monitor that more effectively now. So we've seen some really good improvements with the waiting well policy. We did, up until recently, have a couple on the corporate risk register that have recently come off. So we had one around the CQC inspection and around our preparedness for that, because we knew it was going to be a demand on resources and we wanted that to be flagged at a corporate level. Obviously, we've had the inspection now, so that's now come off because we'll be dealing with that within the directorate rather than it will still affect cross-council, but obviously it doesn't need to be as high risk as it perhaps was 2-3 months ago. And the other one was around data and intelligence, and much of that was around the fact that we'd introduced a new case management system. There was a lot of work to do around the reporting, system development, but we've made really great improvements with that. We've got systems set up, we've got weekly meetings. So again, it was flagged as a risk, but we've reduced that. So the only one that isn't the corporate one as it stands is the safeguarding one. So I'll close there, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donovan.
I'll go. I'm filled with confidence from that. Absolutely. You know, I would expect that level of risk management to be in place in an organisation like this. What about the organisations that are arm's length from us or in different sectors who are working under our commission or with our service users? Do we have arrangements to make sure that their risk assessment of their commission work or their part of the service on our behalf is tickety-boo?
Yeah, what I didn't mention is that a lot of this feeds into a system level approach as well. So there is the ICB West Yorkshire Subcommittee for Quality. So there's risk that's managed across all partners in terms of the colleagues that you've seen here today from Locala and Mid York CHFT. So there's a bigger approach there. Where it comes down to commissioning and contracting, there are slightly different arrangements in terms of if it was something that we were concerned about a particular establishment, that would be fed through our CHESP system. Sorry, I'm using an acronym and I can never remember what's that. Care Home Early Support and Escalation Process. But it comes through, and even at a very early level, if it's a contracted service or it's a provider and we've got concerns about that, that is monitored so closely. It may get to the point where it ends up on a council risk register, but generally it goes through a slightly different process because it has to be managed slightly differently. I don't know if you want to come in, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Lex. And I think the other layer of scrutiny that we would have is through the CQC, because we're under commission with contracted registered provision in Kirklees, and we have our own contracts team that have eyes and ears on all our contracted provision throughout Kirklees, and we would put, say for example, provider failure. Some providers would find themselves in enhanced quality surveillance, which there is a very robust council process that we follow, and that's done in partnership with CQC, but it's also done in partnership with our ICB colleagues, because quite often homes we both place in those establishments, so it's done very much jointly. So yeah, in terms of risk management, we have a very good, robust process in place. And I think when for example, if a home is at the end of the road with us and we serve notice on contracts, again, that process kicks in from working with the sector to making sure that there's smooth transition of those individuals to other establishments where appropriate. So in terms of that assurance piece, we do a lot of work with the sector. And we've got Kirklees Care Association that also reaches into Calderdale. You may not have met them yet, Darren, but we do have really good relationships with our independent and private sector as well.
Councillor Firth?
Following that up on one of the earlier slides, it says review of fraud risk. Could you explain what kind of fraud you will be looking at, or what's the risk? Review of fraud risk, it says.
I mean, it's quite a difficult answer to give, because fraud is not undertaken by adult social care. That will be done through our welfare and exchequer services, which is managed under, obviously, corporate services. So if you want us to sort of answer that, we'd have to come back.
It's identified in this slide. It says review of fraud risk, so there must be a risk somewhere in the system regarding fraud.
Do you want to go in?
Yep.
Would it be?
Yeah, so all of the directorates have been asked to review their fraud risks. In terms of the ones that we identified, there was things around use of direct payments. So it's just putting measures in place to make sure a direct payments when an individual receives money and they can purchase care themselves rather than us purchase it for them. So that's on our fraud list, just to make sure we've got checks and balances in place around direct payments to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen. There was a risk around our care providers as well, in terms of are they providing the hours that they're commissioned to provide, etc. There was another couple of temporary increases that providers ask for example, when they're supporting somebody. So we've got we just were looking at it yesterday actually, as a directorate, that is there anything within your specific directorate that could be related to fraud, and it tends to be around how providers are receiving money, and then potentially around direct payments. We're not concerned. We've got really, really good things in place to prevent that from happening, but we just have it on a register in case.
Thank you. That's what we're looking for. Rather than an individual fraud, was it an organisational fraud? Yeah.
Are there any further questions? There will always be things that will be on a risk register. Coming from like an NHS background, we've got things that will probably never happen, but if they did happen, it would actually be quite devastating for the service that we were actually running there. How many at the moment risks do we actually have on, not on the corporate register risk, but at a directorate level?
I can take that one. So the directorate risk level, they're sort of split within adult social care. They're split between adult social care and then the sort of strategic commissioning and provider elements. So under the adult social care, we've got 6 on there, and on the commissioning and partnerships, we've got 7. We haven't got any red ones on there. And they tend to be around, so to give you an example, one of them that sits under Kath's area, which is the adult social care one, is around, it's not a risk, like I said, it's a risk because it's always going to be a risk that we have to provide quality services to people and quality assessments, quality care plans. But to ensure that we do that, there's been a programme of work around that, so the mitigations around that are around reviewing our but completely actually reviewing our audit cycle, so that's, you know, way more robust than it was before. And I think implementation of things like practice and quality groups, the financial delegation scheme that's recently been reviewed, so talking about signing off on and the system of signing off on packages of care, and things like where we've got another one that's on there is around the dolls and the Daleks, so looking at the new signatory system, so looking at how we could reduce some of the demand or some of the waiting lists around that. So it's a risk, but we're managing it, so it's not something that it's not a concern, but it's something that we need to keep in sight. And those controls and mitigations are there to be monitored, and that's what gets done monthly under both areas. We do that collectively.
Thank you. That was actually going to be my next question. How often are they actually monitored there? Are there any further questions from the panel? I'd like to thank everybody for their presentations today, and we'll just move on finally to the last item on the agenda, which is the actual work programme. At the moment, it's there are no actual changes to it, but I am due to have a couple of informal briefings before the next meeting, and if need be, they will actually be brought onto the work programme, and I will formally close the meeting.